Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay. Welcome to episode 143. I'm speaking with Ivo Klaus, one of the VFX Supervisors for Scanline VFX. This is part 2 of an episode that I did in episode 136. With Ivo, we get into a lot of really great insights and a lot of really great behind the scenes on some of the movies he's worked on and so much more. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. Allan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Allan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Allan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on allanmckay.com.
All right, so welcome to episode 143. So this is going to be really cool. This is actually the second part of an episode I did with Ivo. I wanted these to be super specific, so I'm trying to break them up and just focus on specific themes. So with this one, we got into a lot of Ivo's background, which has entirely been at Scanline VFX. So we talk about a lot of the movies that he's worked on over his career, from Jurassic World, Tomb Raider, Transformers, Star Wars, Pirates of the Caribbean, 2012, 300, and so many other films. And there's a lot that we get into. I think this is going to be a really fun episode, very in-depth, very technical at times. He does share a lot of really great advice. We get into a lot. I love this episode. So that being said, if you want to check out the show notes, go to allanmckay.com/143 for episode 143. And in addition to that, I have some new training, which is only going to be out for another couple of days. So you would literally need to go get it right now if you want it, because 3 days from now, it's gone for good. This is a free course that I put together that is over 10 hours of high-value visual effects production work, taking a complete visual effects shot from start to finish. This is going to be really cool. Check it out, allanmckay.com/energyball. If the date is past June 8th, which is when it closes, you can still go there, and there's going to be some additional resources and other courses and other things like that you can get for free. So that link will still be around, and you'll be able to get a lot of really cool stuff, as well as get on the waiting list for the next free course they're going to be putting out. So allanmckay.com/energyball to get access to it there. And without any further ado, let's dive in. Ivo, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat. And do you want to quickly just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi. My name is Ivo Klaus. I'm working at Scanline VFX in Munich, and I've been there for 13 years now. It's quite a bit, and taking up multiple roles depending on the projects and the times, but currently I'm VFX Supervisor and department lead there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, happy to be here and to chat with you about some of that line of work.
Awesome, man. Thank you. And again, as I mentioned before, do you want to mention how you got started? I'm kind of curious, did you always want to be an artist, or did you kind of fall into it along the way? What's the basic path of your humble beginnings?
Yeah, well, I guess like many people, I've been right from early on, I liked to create things. So I was always drawing stuff, and I even was involved with role-playing, pen and paper role-playing, mm-hmm. and obviously playing computer games and all that stuff. I wasn't so much into the fine art direction, but more into the world creation that had a special allure to me. Mm-hmm. And when I finished school, I thought, well, I have only this one life, so I might just as well try and go into a direction that I like to do, and that I think I could do for the rest of my life. So the thing that I did is I had the choice to go to a university in Germany or go to a university that I found, University of Teesside in Middlesbrough in England. Mm-hmm. And they are offering a course called Computer Games Design.
Cool.
So I did go there in the end, and I've never even left Germany on my own before. So
it's a big deal.
It was a pretty big decision back then. And I packed all my belongings and took my car and drove over there, and then studied there for 3 years.
How old were you at the time?
I was 18, 19.
Wow. Yeah, it's a big deal to pack up, leave the country, and pursue studying elsewhere for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. But taking that opportunity to go abroad and taking the chance to experience another culture, like firsthand for a couple of years, that really broadens your horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, those studies, I mean, some of them were pretty game-centered, which didn't do a lot for my later career. But a lot of that stuff, like I got accustomed to 3ds Max and some other things that were really helpful as in a CG generalist kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up working for a year or even 2 years for different games companies,
Cool.
even during the course. And after the course, I went back to Germany and had a look around. And that's when I discovered, it was more by accident, I think, that I found this company in Munich, and I saw that they were working on movies, and that kind of instantly got my attention.
Right.
So
What company was that?
well, that was Scanline. Yeah, you guessed it.
Well, let me interrupt, and I'll just say, like, I do like that though, because it's so different. There are some people who, I'm one of those who loves to jump around from project to project. At the same time, there are going to be people who are from the get-go, they find a place that they can really invest themselves in, and at the same time, as they go through it, they realize that this is the environment that they're really comfortable in, and they want to grow and be part of that family. And I think that that's the one thing you miss if you are jumping around, is that you end up having lots of families, but you don't ever get to just stay in one place and really grow.
That's exactly the case. So our industry currently consists of people who are either jumping around a lot, and some of them really love it, like they wouldn't want it any different way. And some people are more like they want to kind of have a little bit more stable environment, or maybe they get so involved with a certain company and that environment that they just decide to stay and grow with the company.
No,
so
cool.
For me, I mean, at the start, that it was a bit like on a brink decision, because I had this other games company that I would have gone and worked for, and I was already pestering Scanline for a couple of months to try and get an appointment with them.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow they never really got time to do that. So in the end, I was just very annoying, I guess, because in the end, like literally on a day before I would have taken that other job offer, they did give me a call back, and then I managed to have a first interview and then got there. And I really started out as a CG generalist, and only by working on a couple of projects, I got introduced to the FX side of things, and especially Flowline. And that kind of got me hooked. And well, now I'm there 13 years later. I'm kind of still doing similar things, which isn't really a bad thing in my mind. But obviously a lot of changes happened along the way, and a lot of things happened. But I guess my career was pretty straightforward, if you would call it like that.
Well, let me jump in for a minute, because I'm kind of curious about this. So initially, when you were about 18, 19, and you were in Munich at the time, or where were you?
Yeah, well, in Bavaria, in the southern part of Germany.
Okay. So with that though, like when you decided to go and study in England, what were a lot of your friends doing? I'm just kind of curious, if you were to compare yourself to them, like were any of them really kind of deciding to do something that out of the box, or were they all kind of like looking in their local area? I'm just kind of curious about the mindset of a lot of the people in your circle, whether they had that kind of go-getter attitude, or whether it's more like, no, like that's weird to go and do something so kind of out there,
Yeah, well, actually, all of my friends back then were very conservative. I don't recall a single one who didn't end up in doing something a lot more mundane. So I'm kind of an exception like that. But personally, I never really, I didn't choose it because of comparing myself to others, but I really felt that I need to take that chance and go out there and experience how it could be to work in an industry and to earn your life by doing something where you can be creative and where you can at the same time earn your income by doing that. I think everybody needs to create something. I think that's an integral part of every human being. So in some it's just stronger than in others, I guess.
Personally, my take on it is I think it's more fear. Like I think that, and that's why I'm curious whether your friends were the same or whether they would see it like, as incongruent, like not normal, like, oh, like, why are you doing that? That's weird. You should go and do, go get a, as you said, a more mundane career because it's consistent with what we're doing. And I think that a lot of people, like, we all probably have that bigger idea of things we want to do, but somewhere along the way, either ourselves have told us that we're not good enough, or our parents have said, that, or it's not aligned with what their plans for you were, or your friends just think that it's not normal and you've got to stay consistent with them.
Yeah, that's true. But the response I mostly got was more a bit of a surprise than really like, oh, why are you doing something like that? It's more like an initial surprise usually, and then, oh, that's good for you. Like, good luck.
But that's great. I mean, it's good that they had your back.
Yeah, I know. Way. I mean, there are a lot of people who have. I mean, people are usually more emotional or less emotional. Mm-hmm. And I feel you have to, I mean, when you grow up, you're definitely confronted with a lot of uncertainties in your life. And part of growing up is, I think, facing some of those and seeing behind the curtain and realizing that it's pretty much every person harbors similar feelings and ideas. So there's really nothing to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. So anybody who wants to pursue a certain path, I mean, there's always a way back. So it's not that you're out there and you have no fallback plan. That's usually not what happens, right?
Yeah, but I think that most people think that like when something bad happens, it's the end of the world. And like this is my whole take. I was thinking a lot about it, oddly enough, this morning, just about how most people would think like, hey, I really want to go get a raise. I should go ask for a raise. Then they think, well, what if they say no? What if they fire me? What if I'm homeless next week? And before you know it, like in their brain, it becomes this bigger thing, which in reality, it isn't at all. Like you're right. Like everything is reversible. And no matter how bad things get, you can get out of that thing. But a lot of people, the rationale isn't there. They're not thinking enough about whether the fear they're having is actually real, or whether or not like all they're thinking is like, oh, I better not do that because I'll get laughed at, or because someone will say no. And then all the feelings that come with it are the thing that they listen to, not whether or not it's actually real. And I think that you're absolutely right. Like anything, no matter how bad it gets, like you could lose your job and your home and everything else, but you can come back from that. And most of the time, what we're worried about isn't even that bad. It's you ask for a raise, someone might say no. And it's like, okay, well, what do I need to do to get the raise? It's like, well, do these things. Okay, great. I'll go do that. That wasn't so bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the main takeaway is that if you encounter a situation that you haven't been in before, usually there's a way where you don't just need to jump into it straight away. Like you can feel out whether or not that feels right, and then adapt while you're doing that. So I mean, for example, if you're applying for a job, it pays off to maybe get some information about the company and what they do. Yeah. Or maybe you can find an interview with some people and then you already have some more background information, and maybe you just get a gut feeling on how to approach them. Mm-hmm. So I guess a lot of things are like that, and some people think if they don't confront something heads on, then it's not going to work, or maybe it's also just a intuitive reaction. But overall, you can usually always go into a situation and be reactive more than active at first if you're uncertain. Mm-hmm. Like first get a feeling on how the situation is before you actually decide on a course of action, and not jump in there and say and shout out what you're about to say.
I think you really nailed it on the head, because I think that like in this day and age, if you were applying for a job, doing just a little bit of research, even going on LinkedIn, you can see who works at the company. You can go, hey, I didn't realize that like my buddy that I went to school with is actually over there, or I worked with at this time, or whatever. And just doing the little bit of like front loading the work means that you have a better idea how to build a plan rather than just going all in. And I think that like, just to kind of segue for a second to effects or anything, but effects I think is definitely a really problem-solving area of 3D. And I do find that the more junior you are, the more people kind of just want to get in there and start doing stuff without really thinking about how they're going to do it. They just want to make the most complicated, cool tools and other things. And like for me, I feel like you could probably sit down with a pen and paper and have a pretty good idea about how exactly to nail the shots you're going to do before you even get in there and start doing it. And by having a plan, you're going to have the 30,000 foot view. You're going to see how it's all going to come together and whether you're focusing on the right thing in the first place. But I think the younger you are, the more you're just going to jump in there and just start making cool explosions and things. And even though like that element mightn't even be an important element at all, it's kind of like blurred out in the background, but you're just focusing on doing what you think is fun and trying to make it as complicated as you can. And I think that is kind of what you're saying too, that a lot of people can just kind of jump right in there and get their hands dirty without really thinking about, hey, is there a better way to go about doing this, like getting a job or whatever it might be. It's just thinking ahead, doing a bit of research,
Yeah, I think that's also what a lot of people, I mean, obviously there is a big allure to FX when you watch a movie and you see all these really big effects happening.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there is a lot of like every big effect is a teamwork. It's not something that you can actually really properly do on your own machine in the same time frame. I mean, if you're a really versed artist and you have CG generalist abilities and you know compositing and you know how to shoot live action, that's really helpful. But even if you know all of that, the investment you would have to make in order to turn out a private full effects Hollywood shot, that investment would be, incredible. You would probably be working a full year on it on your own money and you wouldn't have the same result. So that's something to keep in mind, that I think a lot of people try to jump in and do the really big effect immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if you're starting out, I think, it kind of depends a little bit on where you're going. Like if you just want to test out things or get to know the tools, you can be a lot more free. But if you're really dedicated about working in the industry and working on feature films, I think it's good if you have a certain plan or a certain idea on which step you need to take to get there.
I'll quickly say that I completely agree with you about the misunderstanding people have of how much work it takes to do a visual effects shot. And when you're working on a feature film, you're right. Like there are so many people, and especially effects, like so much simulation time and computer power that is required. And that does baffle me sometimes when people are kind of shaking their head if their simulation takes more than an hour, like that, there must be something wrong. Like this isn't right. And when they first get in there, I will say, like Martin Marola, who's one of the students in the mentorship who went on to Scanline, I'll say is a freak of nature, because he was the one guy who had like a computer with 16 gigs of RAM, yet he was doing some really impressive stuff, and it was just always like, for me, like whenever I had people asking to do the course, when they said like, how much RAM do I need? I would always say minimum 32, but there was this one guy ... So, yeah. So I think
there's always this one guy.
He's still got a 286 and he's doing amazing, work.
Yeah. I can't imagine. Just a couple of years back, we just had 4 gigabytes of RAM and there was no going beyond that point.
He had 1 megabyte of RAM back in the beginning.
I can't even remember how we made do with that little amount of RAM, but yeah, somehow it played out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then now we have like 62 or 128 gigabyte of RAM. And sometimes that is not enough. That
Yeah.
sometimes does baffle me.
Yeah, I was on Superman, and Jeremy Battelle is one of the VFX soups at Digital Domain. I remember like chatting to him because he was the first person I think to get it was like a quad core PC. I think it was a quad core machine, and so it had like 8 CPUs. And I remember asking him, I think it was 8 GB of RAM and 8 CPUs or something like that. And I was like, wow, like how much faster is it than all the other computers to render on? And he's like, it's exactly the same, except when I hop on another computer, I just notice how slow it is now. So, I feel like it's relative. It's like no matter how fast your computer is, it's going to feel exactly, as slow as like every computer before you. But then you're just going to notice how slow every computer before you was.
Yeah, that's a definite takeaway as well. Over the years, you will notice with every new iteration of computers, artists will complain about their computers being too slow. And when they finally have better machines, it will only take 1 or 2 weeks and they will complain about them being too slow or having too little RAM.
Yep.
But the benefit is that in the movies, we can actually work on scales that we weren't able to do a couple of years back. I mean, we don't notice it as much most of the time because it happens so gradually, but it is happening and the effects are becoming bigger simulation-wise and processing-wise. And we're able to do more within one scene now than we were able to do back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it blows my mind, especially you guys at Scanline, like the like scale, you're right, is exactly it. Like the level of detail that you guys have managed to go to, I feel like it kind of goes backwards. It's you end up doing these really big effects, but it's more about how macro you can get with the details going on in a shot. So suddenly, instead of being a wave hitting, let's say, a bridge or whatever it might be, suddenly you're doing that, but now you've got like all these little miniature effects, everything that's going to reinforce the scale of how big something is. The detail that you're adding in, the subtleties, and you guys are definitely masters of doing that. Like it blows my mind.
Thank you very much. It's on a recent show. I mean, we've been working on the latest Transformers movie, and that was a great experience. And I have to say that the team was awesome on that show. But besides the cool thing to be able to work on a franchise like that, or the ability to work with these amazing artists, is on that one, talking about big effects, our task was to raise like a 1.6 mile long alien spaceship from the ocean. And initially that just like, once you get the brief, you get a mixed bag of feelings always. And that happened to me on many projects. So you will get the brief and you will notice, oh, okay, we are actually doing this, aren't we? and then you instinctively, you are torn because you want to run away, but at the same time, you really want to dive into this and make it work. So, I mean, those large scales, I mean, we're happy enough at Scanline that we have a massive infrastructure built around our proprietary tools and 3ds Max, and that is going a long way. So I think a lot of the really big effects, they really need a massive infrastructure nowadays.
Yeah.
So obviously you can do shots with less infrastructure, but I mean, I was recently trying to render something locally on my machine, and it's not the slowest machine, at least I think so, but I've rendered a couple of 100 frames and it took over a week to render. And that is kind of the stuff that you can do nowadays in a company in half a day and look at it and watch it in dailies and then go back and redo it. So there's something that you cannot be prepared if you're learning to go into it.
Yeah, it's very true.
And working with that kind of scale requires everybody to be disciplined about what they are sending and how they're managing it. So I guess, I don't know, but I mean, calling somebody an FX artist is inherently at least halfway wrong, because you need to be a creative person and you need to be able to shape and interpret something that you get as input and create something beautiful. But at the same time, if you cannot manage yourself, if you don't have a grasp of the tools that you have to use, and if you are not at least a little bit into bureaucracy like that, then you're also having a hard time in this job.
Yeah, I think that most people forget that. I think they come in thinking that it's so cool and exciting that they get to do whatever it is, like, character sculpting, or whether it's effects and blowing stuff up, but they're not thinking about all the other aspects of it. You're a team, you got to be humble, you've got to be able to work fast, you got to make sure that you're considerate of others, in the sense that when you finish something, make sure it's optimized, presentable, it's clear to other people, because otherwise their work's going to slow down in terms of even just opening your file and trying to understand what's going on. All the practices that we need to do to better ourselves in terms of the grand scheme of things. A lot of that, I think, in the beginning isn't really thought about, in terms of just, hey, let's chat at lunch instead of chatting, throughout the day, just so we can get our job done while it's rendering. Then we can, move aside and relax, just all the basic practices of being a better worker, as well as being an artist who can understand the pipeline and the workflow and what your role is in terms of what you need to give to the next artist so they can do their job. All those things that I think people neglect in the very beginning.
That's true, and I mean, I can see that today you're obviously, you need to fulfill a certain position in a company. So if you're an FX artist in the bigger companies, you will only be doing FX. Most of the time, you won't even be doing the rendering or lighting or shading of the FX. But the smaller or medium-sized companies, you will find yourself in positions where you have to do more stuff. Or if you're freelance, you will be faced with lots of things where you need generalist knowledge. So knowing the pipeline, knowing the workflow, that's really something that is ultimately important, because you need to be working and taking off work from other people. So oftentimes, I mean, it's in the nature of things that when people start out or people come to us, especially for us, we need to, for every person that will join us, we are really trying to go out of our comfort zone and try and give them as much as possible information and input and teaching as projects allow about our in-house software, for example, which they cannot learn anywhere else, right?
Right. Digital Tutors doesn't have a Flowline course?
I think not, or I would know about it, I think. But that is something where in a production environment, there's nobody who can really hold your hand. So you're going in there, you're tasked with beautifying a shot, and you need to do your task as self-sufficiently as possible and in time. So that is something that sometimes it's hard to gear people towards that kind of attitude, and it's also not always perfect. So there's never a real black and white. So there's no, you can't involve other people in what you do. No, on the contrary, you have to. But at the same time, you have to choose when to involve other people to help you along, or maybe expedite what you're doing. So I always find that I'm always on the lookout for people that are everything, people that are programmers, people that are artists, people that are great team workers, people that are disciplined, and the best person has all these qualities at a high level. Mm-hmm. And if you look into your heart, most of everybody will feel like, oh, okay, well, I have this, I have that, I might be lacking in that or this other thing, but that is fine as well. It's just that I think the pinnacle of an FX artist that I could imagine just has this great mixture of being able to teamwork, being disciplined, being able to program, and being able to be very creative and artistically shaping a shot.
Right. No, I agree. And I'm curious about that too. Just in your opinion, how important do you think it is for artists when they first start out to kind of go into the world as a generalist, even if they want to be a lighting artist, even if they want to do effects, how important do you think it is to get a good broad understanding of the entire pipeline before they start to specialize?
Well, since I'm FX department lead, I get to see a lot of reels or people that are applying for positions at Scanline. And I always like it when I see successful integration into live action plates. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that there is a lot of skills that come with this particular integration into live action that is just not easy to see when you're being presented something that is rendered on black, for example.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would definitely say it's really necessary for people to grasp how the workflow works and what the steps are until you have the finished product. Mm-hmm. I don't particularly think that you need to dive extremely deep into each of these aspects. It can definitely help you. So, for example, if you're a CG generalist, you can probably cross over into being an FX artist, and the CG generalist background will do you a lot of good because you can fill up certain blanks in your work with your other knowledge. But at the same time, if you're an amazing FX artist and you can demonstrate it, but you have little knowledge about other parts, that can also work. It's just that the FX quality that you have to deliver will need to be better than if you can successfully show that you can integrate something beautifully into a live action element.
Yeah, I think you're right about that too, about people, let's say, submitting stuff on their reel that's just rendered on black. And I think it's cool to, learn the process, but, when you're submitting stuff that's tutorial work or whatever it might be, and essentially you're saying, well, cool, I made a cool explosion or whatever it is, here it is, give me a job. I think that people kind of forget, the perspective of the person hiring them, because I think that it's very easy these days to make something look cool. Like I can go and knock out a cool effect, an explosion, whatever, in a couple of minutes, but going and finishing a shot, showing that you can actually sit down tomorrow and do the work, that showing like a rendered explosion on black or something is not going to show that you can sit down and tomorrow and to start working. Being able to take a shot from start to finish, when someone says, what did you do in the shot? And you said, I shot it, I tracked it, I blew up a wall, or I made a car crash, I lit and rendered it. I think that if you're able to demonstrate that, then it shows that you can sit down in a chair tomorrow, I can give you shots, and you can start knocking them out. And to me, it makes it a no-brainer. Like, yeah, I'm going to hire you because you've proved to me that you can do the work. There's no gamble, there's no risk, there's no like, okay, you can do a cool effect, but how do I know that you can actually deliver, or are you going to get caught in that limbo hell of revisions because you don't understand the rest of the pipeline? So I think that it is really critical to have that understanding of integrating live action with CG.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are lots of solutions that are non-CG that happen in compositing nowadays, and if you're not aware of this, you can end up churning out iteration after iteration and running late on things because you don't know that compositing now has a 3D space and can use deep image data or use world space passes to do creative masks and stuff like that. I mean, there's so much to learn and so much problems you encounter when you want to integrate something into live action, and so much problem solving that you will be tasked with if you do that. And that's really the meat and bone of what we're doing. I mean, we do have full CG shots, obviously, but at the end, we're working in live action movie film industry. So that means we have to know all this stuff. And it really helps everybody grow when he goes through the whole process. I mean, in my spare time, I've been in the industry not as long as you are, but I find that I still go back home and sit down and have a look at new developments and maybe doing small little projects that might never really surface anywhere, but give me additional insight into new developments or workflows that I haven't had time to look into so far. It's just that you never stop learning, and it's even more true in our industry.
Yeah, definitely. And just going back to what you mentioned about programming or having some kind of scripting ability, do you want to elaborate a little bit on that as well? Just how you think it might be beneficial?
Yeah, when I go back a couple of years, years back now, but it was a time when pipeline work or a big pipeline wasn't present. So at one point, me and a colleague started out to script our own little programs to create pipeline tools, because we found that commercial tools, and even nowadays commercial tools, are not ideally suited for doing iterations of work and managing those and going back and creating save spots and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we were able to create small little pipeline tools that essentially took away some of the tedious tasks of management from us, because we saw that was necessary to move forward. I mean, luckily for us, maybe a year later, the company already made great efforts to build up a pipeline that was well integrated and a lot more extensive. But I remember that there was a time when there wasn't something like that. And I remember distinctly several times in our projects where being able to use scripting or being able to call on somebody who had programming knowledge is really saving us a lot of time, or even creating something that is not possible with the commercial tools out of the box. Mm. So for example, for the film Snowpiercer, we build a Mac scripted tool to create railway tracks for the snow train. We created multiple additional tools for multiple projects that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. We had somebody create a massive connection to V-Ray, for example. And there are all these little things that they don't exist right now. And maybe it's possible to create something that helps you along quite well, but you need somebody to know how to do it. And if you're just an artist with knowledge about the tool that you're using, without being able to script or program, you can still be a valuable asset to any company. But if something hits the fan and you are in a position where you need to come up with a solution that the commercial tools aren't providing, what are you going to do? You can't just roll over and pretend you're dead. You need to come up with a solution. And in this industry, every project, every good director will want something in his movie that has never been seen before. And he will come to you and say, I have this idea of something that nobody has seen before. Can you do it? And you will be like, yeah, sure, we can do it. We'll do it in a couple of months. And then you need to come up with a way to make this happen. And if you're listening to other people in the industry or other projects, you will find that especially for this industry, you have to be very inventive, and you need to be able to come around with creative solutions. And if you're just limited to what every commercial tool can offer you, even if you have loads and loads of tools nowadays, it's going to be limiting. So we have to do a lot of R&D work and create stuff that hasn't been done before. And then you're automatically touching on programming, scripting, more extensive technical things that you'll encounter.
That's great. And I guess just to put the nail in the coffin, because I think that everything you've said has been so vital. And I think that for anyone out there listening who is okay, well, what are the 3 or 4 things that I need to really grasp to go and work successfully in visual effects? You mentioned, a couple of these things, but if you were to summarize this quickly, the 3 or 4 areas that someone should really just put their time into, so that way they know that they're ticking all the right boxes to be an effective effects person or VFX person. What do you think, just to recap quickly, what do you think are those key things?
Yeah, so the basis of what we do is definitely, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can integrate an FX effect into live action footage. So that is the basis. Once you've covered that, there is more to know, obviously. I mean, once you've covered that, you will have touched on many things that you know are already or that are really necessary. But beyond that, you need to be able to work quickly. You need to know how to speed up your turnarounds, because our industry is not about having a week of time until you have to deliver something. It's about ideally showing something to your supervisor as soon as possible. So you need to be quick and know about how to manage yourself according to deadlines. So that would be the second thing I would say, that you need to be able to work in an environment where you know you have deadlines and you have a certain knowledge about how you can reach them, or at least communicate what you are able to reach in a certain time. You will definitely need to be able to work in a team and pipeline constraints. So that is something that I find that's probably something you cannot possibly really do, because each company will have different people around you and different pipeline tools. And if you need to have technical skills as well, because as we talked about briefly now, if you need to be a problem solver most of the time. I mean, every day we have things that we didn't anticipate and we need to solve somehow. So a large part about that is obviously knowing the tools that you're working with, but also being able to come up with unusual solutions by using scripts, for example, or programming.
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. And I guess like early in my career, I was really interested in that subject about like what is the best pipeline out there. And I thought of like at the time, this is more like 2004, 2005, but I would look at, there's a studio called Digital Dimension back then who were doing really well. And they were 100% like, automated, because the owner kind of believed that humans are the problem in every solution, and therefore the more automated everything is, like the more you're going to remove human error. And then I looked at Blur, and Blur definitely in 2004 was 100 people working there, and it was just, if you needed something, you would pretty much just hop on a skateboard and skate over to their desk and say, give me the file, and it was completely just a different kind of workflow altogether. And it was the complete opposite. Then I looked at Frantic Films, which later Prime Focus acquired. And Frantic, I thought, was unique in the sense that they had a team of developers. All of them did, but they had like a really strong team of developers who obviously built Deadline, Krakatoa, Flood was their fluid system at the time. And
yeah,
I felt like with them, the approach would be that if you ran into a problem, like if you hit a wall, with Blur, it would be you would kind of like walk around the wall. With Digital Dimension, it would be essentially go back and find another path, that doesn't have the wall. Whereas with Frantic, having the developers and all the support to be able to do whatever they wanted, it would be build over the wall and keep moving forward. And I just felt like it was always the perfect combination of having the creatives and the technical people together, where you could always build a solution that would solve the problem that you're running into. And I feel like even on the more macro level, if an artist is able to even just simply be able to script, like I know character animators who are able to help build intelligent solutions to what they're doing as artists just for a particular shot. Like it doesn't matter who you are, you can definitely benefit from having at least even a tiny bit of technical skill. It's going to allow you to work more efficiently and also solve issues when you run into them.
I mean, even if you're not a programmer, being able to script a little bit, you might be able to pinpoint your problems much sooner and communicate what you found to somebody who can really dive into it and solve it. I mean, that's one thing that works, in my opinion, great at Scanline. That, I mean, we have this proprietary software package, Flowline, where we can actually contact the developers at any time and tell them, hey, I have this issue, can you fix it? Or we need a certain feature, can we do it? And depending on how strong, obviously, the need for something is, that can make incredible stuff happen at a relatively short time. So that's really awesome, being able to work in an environment that develops with each project. And I mean, really, every project is extremely different on its own as well. So that's really important to have. And as you said, there are like, it can work if you just have a bunch of people that go up to each other's desks and say, okay, here's my element. Can you put it into the comp? That can work, but if something goes bad or certain people suddenly decide to leave
Or you're sick one day and they need files, they need to
exactly,
know where an element came
yeah,
from.
and then nobody knows where they put it. Nobody knows how they did it. Nobody knows whether or not it's being used in other resources. And that's really dangerous. I mean, that can make the difference of a couple of weeks of work. So, and usually that's not something that any project can afford to have nowadays.
That's right. And obviously, Scanline has a lot of proprietary tools. At the same time, like, what, in terms of more out-of-the-box packages, like, what's your typical software solution for doing a lot of the feature films that you guys do?
Yeah, so I like to think of Scanline as a company that is kind of a stalwart 3ds Max user. We have been using 3ds Max for such a long time that personally I feel very comfortable with it. And the tools available for it is also, they've grown and improved over the time. So we are using most of the bigger plugins for 3ds Max, obviously. So we are
Fume,
using,
TP,
for FX, we're using thinking particles for destruction work or particle work. We're using Fume for occasional additional smoke effects where we can possibly, I mean, we have artists that are working with Flowline, obviously. Flowline can do a lot of these effects. So Flowline can do smoke, fire, water, spray, dust, explosions, and stuff like that. But we also have people or artists at Scanline that have a background in Fume, for example. If they come ahead and say, hey, I could solve this with Fume also, let me give it a shot, then that's also possible and not a problem. So we also use Fume, for example. We use Krakatoa. V-Ray is really important for us. And more recently, we've started using Maya as well for certain things. So definitely for animation and even for asset building. And compositing wise, well, you are basically only left with Nuke. So I don't really know a lot of companies that use something else nowadays.
Yeah, I don't see any big Marvel movies coming out that were comped in After Effects.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Kramer might object.
It's funny because as soon as I said that, I'm like, yeah, if he's listening, he'll be like, wait a minute. Because it's true. It is surprising. I mean, again, it's just, it really comes down to, like, that's a good point to bring up, is that there isn't like a one solution to anything. And like compositing typically for really large, like ridiculously large comps, like there's nothing that comes close to Nuke's capability. And I feel like now with Eddie and all these other tools coming out, you're kind of at a point where if you're rendering everything in deep, you almost don't need to ever go back into 3D. You can do so much in comp. It's ridiculous. But at the same time, there's always going to be the specific solutions that you need, even just on a smaller level, to get a part of a comp out that, After Effects or other things, just doing them in Nuke, let's say, is just way more of a headache because it's just a different workflow altogether. So there's always going to be room for other tools. But typically, when you build a pipeline, the whole point of a pipeline is that people have a path that they go down, and this is the path that you do over and over. And it's more, for larger scale stuff, it's more a way to make it a sure thing that, okay, this is how we work. And then when there is those custom solutions, when there's a need for it, you can break away and you can do amazing stuff in different tools. But, and there's nothing wrong with that outside of that spectrum.
I mean, there's, depending on the project, we've also been using other plugins, like, for example, Forest Pack. And
Forest Pack and GrowFX are amazing, and Railcurve.
Yeah,
Railcoin, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with the compositing department, however, is that I know, like, Nuke can do a lot of things now. It can even do extensive 3D stuff, and I've seen simulations running in Nuke. And I'm slowly thinking that sometimes I feel like they're trying to put it into a situation where where rendering a comp will require as long as rendering a 3D render. And I'm not sure, but in my opinion, compositing needs the ability to react really quick. So it's at the end of the workflow. They need to be able to do another iteration within an hour, or otherwise that will be really dangerous.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. Compositing is usually where, like, I feel like effects and compositing are usually the very end of the pipeline. Obviously, effects for 3D, but there's been times where I've been on productions where, on smaller studios, where they've let go of the rest of the team, and it ends up being you and the compositor are reanimating or relighting a shot because there's no one else in the 3D department. And compositing is literally the very end where, on the final day, the client's going to come back with that little change, and they expect you to be able to knock that stuff out quick. And you're not planning to have to render these extensive comps. And when you're getting into 4K stereo and all these other scary places these days, it's you don't want to risk having to say, well, hey, I simulated this pass in Nuke in Eddie, or it's doing something that's really intense that requires an hour to knock out a comp, or a couple hours, instead of it being like, okay, well, let me tweak that little thing and spit out another take at it, and you guys can have a look and hopefully approve it. So you want that. That's also iteration.
Really valuable that you have this foresight. It oftentimes can only be achieved by experience, but you need to look ahead, like ask yourself, okay, once I've finished this task, what happens then? Like if the client says, well, I don't really like the light from the right side, can you put it on the left side? So if you know that might come, you can plan for it accordingly. For example, you can light your elements with RGB lights, and those can be used in comp to kind of relight some things. And if you know it and if you prepare for it, everything is fine. But if you have these long simulations and long renders where you can only say at the end of the day, well, okay, we can show something new at the end of the next week, then that's really, really a bad position to be in. Ideally, you want to be able to say, well, okay, we'll show you something new tomorrow.
That's a really good point too. I think you were talking about this earlier about artists needing to kind of be essentially more able to manage themselves and to think ahead, work within a team, and kind of have that foresight. Because again, like that's one of the critical things, is to have those rules about how you work. I think of so many productions where I've done something that I'm really proud of. I'm like, wow, I got lucky and I pulled out something that looks great. However, the simulation is going to take 3 days to simulate. And even though right now I know I have the time to do it, this is something that, is like, let's say, a hero effect. I don't want to be at the 11th hour where literally on the last day, they come back and say, hey, we need you to change this one thing. And then me say, well, it's going to take 3 days. And so usually at the very beginning, I'm always thinking about how long, whether I'm supervising or whether I'm on the box, it's about, okay, how long, can we expect? Like, what should be the norm for any given shot? So that way, we aren't like kind of held captive to the renders or the simulations at the very end, because it's always the case. Like, someone needs it within a day or two, or something goes wrong. I remember on the movie Flight, someone essentially deleted the project directory. We recovered it all, but my simulations all broke, and there were 5-day sims, and we had 2 days left to deliver the entire movie, and this was the most important shot in the film. And it was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to rethink the entire shot that I've been working on for 3 months, because I've now got 2 days to do something that I know is not going to get done in time, and that's just it. The more that you kind of give yourself those caps, it means that, okay, my effect might not look as cool. I might need to drop the iteration, levels down a little bit, but at least I know I can get that rapid turnaround that I need. So that way, if we need to deliver changes on the last day, we can do it, rather than saying, well, unfortunately, we're going to go over our deadline because of that,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you need to be able to adapt to what happens every day. You can't just, you will receive feedback at every step and turn, and you need to adapt. So you also need to be honest about it. It doesn't help anybody if you say, oh yeah, I can do it. And then at the end of the day, it's taking too long and you get in too little iterations. It's not going to help anybody. And although that is partially part of the coordination team and producers and the VFX supervisors and the FX supervisors to give every artist a certain time frame or a certain leeway to work on it. Still, every artist needs to be aware that the project finishes at a certain time and it needs a high quality output at that time. And every day you need to look at the stuff and ask yourself, well, is the amount that we want to pack in there, is that working? Do we need to assign more people to it? Do we need to find a different solution? Do we need to rethink what we're doing? So it's always a very flowing process. And if you're not adapting to it on a daily basis, you will end up 3 days later and find out that something developed into completely the wrong direction, or take just the same amount of days to get back on track. And that's really dangerous. I mean, everything happens really fast, but you need to be able to adapt to it.
I think that's a really critical thing. Like a lot of people, like I noticed this with designers recently. I've worked with a few where they think that the deadline is the deadline to deliver essentially their first take. The first thing you've ever seen is the deadline for the job, and so then they're kind of angry that you've changes to make and you're going over the deadline. And it's like, no, like the whole point was that you show me stuff and we work towards the deadline. And you get some people who are like, I'm not going to show you anything until it's finished.
Yeah, I mean, I know that. I mean, there are people who feel strongly about their work and they would like to work on it until it's perfect. And I know that happens sometimes. And those people, they don't mean it in a bad way. They think they're creating this big masterpiece. And when they show it, they are proud of what they're showing. And then they realize, well, the vision doesn't match with the vision of the supervisor or of the client. And then oftentimes they'll take it as a personal insult. So it's also critical that you can take that feedback and transform it into something positive again. It doesn't help if you are creating something beautiful if nobody else agrees that that is beautiful. And you can only confirm whether or not it's beautiful in the context of the project if you show it as often as you can, if you share it, if you talk to people around you, or the supervisors get a good look at it as often as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like at the end of the day, we're a service company, like all of us are, or we're service providers. So we're hired to fulfill someone else's vision, not yours.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not. I mean, some people would see that as a negative thing, but it's really a beautiful kind of work that we can do because we get the restrictions, obviously, of working on a shot, and that shot tells a certain story. But most of the time, an FX artist has a really large impact on how the shot will look like in the end. And he will have the ability to transform that one sentence of brief that was given when the turnover was of a shot and transform it into something beautiful in the context of the project. Nowadays, I mean, if you have a movie, oftentimes you get, if you look at the actual previs, or at even if there's only text that describes what happens in the shots, it's not a lot of information. So everybody in our part of the work is involved in creating this, in turning it into something that you can watch in the movie and that enhances the movie. And Agreed. I feel that's not clear oftentimes, that some people will see it as a slight if they get feedback and have to adapt to it. I think they don't realize how much creative control they actually have in the project.
No, it's very true. You're absolutely right. And it's also that collaboration, because I mean, and that's the beauty of it, is that, if you are doing something on your own, then you're not getting to tap into all these other amazing, talented people that have already had, their 10 years of growing, and all of you come together to make this one shot that, comes together, everyone gets to see all over the world. And you're right, it can be a pivotal part to tell a story, or it might be something that's entertaining, whatever it might be. But it's also, you've got to fit in not only with the director's vision, but also, you're also collaborating with all these other people, and all of their stuff is not always going to be about you.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, to be honest, I can I can perfectly understand that a lot of starting FX artists or even people that are already in the industry, I mean, even well, or especially myself, I'm also still very thrilled if I can work on something like Transformers or Rogue One, which are like just, I mean, these are names that initially formed your decision to actually join this industry, right?
Yeah.
So everybody dreams about something like that happening. But at the same time, you will have a lot of projects where you're working on things or even on movies where the movie might not fulfill what you would like the movie to be, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, I found that there is a lot of stuff in our line of work that is a lot of fun. And for me, the fun is still more than the negative sides. So the opportunity to develop new stuff or even on shows where you have to kind of grind effects into the same effect into several shots. There is something where you can get deep into developing a way to get a certain effect a bit automatized and integrated into several shots by the push of a button, for example. There's so much that is a lot of fun in this industry. And I think definitely for myself, I've decided long ago that the positive things outweigh the negative things.
Yeah, I think you're right, because there's definitely a bit of a buzz the past couple of years about, even people who are not in this industry have become aware that, there is a bit of an imbalance within the industry. But I feel like every industry is going to have a bit of that, and especially a non-unionized industry as ours, and also a competitive one like ours, there's going to be some struggle, there's going to be a bit of pain, but at the same time, like, we are privileged to get to do something so amazing. As I record this, I'm looking out my window and I've got a bunch of people building a sauna and a few things in my backyard, and I look at it like I'm at my desk, I'm stressed and I'm running around all day, but I could be outside like with a hammer, which sounds fun, but I know at the end of the day I'm going to be so exhausted, in so much pain, and instead, I get to complain about like, oh, my render's taking too long. Like, I think that we're all very fortunate to be in a position to create, to have something that, people are going to get to see all over the world, to contribute and work with so many other talented people. I think there's so many positives, and you're right, like there are going to be some negatives. But I also think it comes down to the more experienced you get, the more you can realize like what decisions you make are yours. And that's one thing, like I will say, more from a supervising point of view than anything else. Like what really bothers me, even when it's not my company or I'm not part of the management, is when people complain about like, I'm not being paid enough money, yet they were the one that agreed to the money when they came on. When they start slacking off like, oh, well, I'm not going to do any more work because I'm not getting paid enough for this. And it's like, you accepted the paycheck. Like you could have said, I want more, or you could have said no. But, those are the situations that bother me.
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, that's a tricky line to walk as well, because I've been once or twice in a situation where there's just one person in the room who's really negative. And it's strange, but if one person is really outspoken about something like that,
contagious.
It's really contagious and will affect everybody in the room. So especially as a supervisor or department lead, I'm always trying to get to keep most of the pressure as far away as possible from the artists, and to try and get a working environment where everybody can evolve a little bit. I mean, obviously there are boundaries to that. But I always feel that you can't be fully creative if you're under too much pressure. And for some people, that's more true than others. But at the same time, as you say, or even nowadays, there is, nobody's really lying about what it's like to work in our industry. And obviously, I'm happy if we are not working overtime. But at the same time, once it happens, I think it can't be helped sometimes. We occasionally manage to get projects going where it worked out really well for us. But then again, I thought we nailed it, and then another project came along where we had to invest more time again. But it's just partially it's the creative nature of our work, and that we always try to push the boundaries and doing stuff that hasn't been done before. And obviously, if you do that, you will find that you can't really always put that into a fixed schedule.
Yep. Anything in 3D is not gonna go to schedule. That's my rule of thumb. Is 3D, shit's gonna go wrong. Okay, so
yeah, I mean that just happens. I mean, you can plan for it and you can buffer it, but it will happen every now and then.
Mm.
So if people really complain about that, that's, I don't know. As you said, it's a bit strange that you would have people complaining about it when they willingly signed up for it. I mean, what I like, and I think that's partially due to our to Scanline's nature, that we have this flowline tool that we are trying to evolve, and it's helping us a lot and it's really powerful, but at the same time we have to teach it to newcomers completely.
Right.
And there are concepts that people know from other softwares, and but there are also like things that you can only learn with us. So we are always trying to attract people and get them to stay with us for a little bit longer. And usually we get a more intimate relationship to everybody on the team.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what I also like about Scanline, is that you end up doing several projects together, and it's not as volatile as if you were a freelancer and traveling the whole world each year, a different continent or something like it. I mean, this industry is relatively small. It's very likely you will meet the same people again after a few years.
In many different countries, oddly enough.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Or in places where you didn't expect them to be.
Yep.
But at the same time, if you get the opportunity to work on projects for longer times or periods, you kind of know what to expect from people. And it's also very good from a supervisor standpoint that you already know how a person works, because that's something that baffled me at first, that every person wants to be treated completely different, and there's no way around it. I mean, as a supervisor, you have to talk to people and you have to try and talk their language and translate what the vision of the project is, or what the vision of a certain shot is, or how to tackle a technical problem. And I find that as a supervisor, with new people, you are struggling a while until you know how to approach them. Mm-hmm. And how to talk their language, or connect to them in a way that they will understand what you want from them. So that's what I thought you could be a bit more like on the spot when I came into the industry. So I thought you could give a sentence of a clear feedback, and then that would be clear, or that would clear out what to do. But some people don't work like that. So yeah. You need to talk to them, and you need to, even if it means that you will need to mention a couple of things twice or 3 times. Some people just work like that, but then the same people might make up for it on a different level. So that's really interesting. And that's also part of the charm, that you get to know and kind of intimately know, in a work environment anyway, know how this person works. And if you work for a longer time with those people, they kind of grow onto you, and that's quite a nice thing to have if it works out for everybody.
I think you're absolutely right. Like I mentioned before, I freelance a lot, but it's typically the same clients, and I think that's always been the critical thing, is when you go back in. Like I mentioned Flight before, and I love on Flight how we had a meeting where there was a shot on Transformers that I had done like a year before, and it was just one of those things that I'd basically been working on the shot for a long time, and I think that we're all trying to figure out like where it was going, like trying to figure out like creatively like what we needed to do, and then finally like we got to a point where we're almost like I'd almost finished the shot, but it was at a point where we finally kind of figured out what we wanted, and it was a lot easier, I think, just to restart the shot from scratch than to just kind of continue to noodle with this like very heavy scene. And everyone being seniors, you kind of you're able to have that foresight. But I love that a year later, it's the same thing. It's like, hey, remember a year before how we did this? Like, yeah, let's just do it again. Like now we know what we want. Let's just start from scratch and get the shot done by tomorrow. Because I think that in most shots, at least that are not too heavy, it's more about like, it's more figuring out creatively what you want. And then once you've got that recipe, you can dial it all in again, and it's easier on a lighter, easier, faster scene than it would be a heavy one. But, again, like working with the same people, you kind of have that communication, that language. And, whereas like when you have a new team of people every single time, that's the tricky thing, because you're right. Like some people, you can tell them the whole picture and say like, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to look like this and it's going to be great. And then other people, it might take you a while to realize that you can't give them all the information. It's too much, and you need to give them a little bit. And when they get to that point, then you give them a little bit more. And like everyone has a different way of working. And I think that that's the critical thing, is to figure out how everyone works. And even from a studio perspective, like I remember one movie I worked on where it was one of my favorite projects to ever work on. And it was just, the team was what made it. And unfortunately, they didn't have any other work after that project. So the team dispersed. And the problem is like the next, sad. Yeah. And well, the thing is with that is the next time they had a project, I wasn't interested, even though it was one of my favorite places to work. It was the people that made it. And I knew the next time around, it just wouldn't be the same experience. And so like sometimes you go work places because, there is that family, the magic team that you come together and you do amazing stuff together. And if you can keep that and have that big talent pool, then that's the strength that's really going to make you. And again, not to kiss Scanline's butt, but you guys, like obviously have built that language and established that relationship over decades, that now you know all your strengths and you know where to focus and who to assign a shot to or an effect to, because of the way that you've worked previously.
Well, I mean, ideally that's the case. We do also have fluctuation, and although I'm very lucky that we usually have a team that stays for a while. It's inevitable that people leave at some point. That usually a gap like that is not easy to replace. And if you get new people coming in, obviously they might not replace the leaving people entirely. So there's a whole dynamic that changes when people leave and new people come. But overall, it's we are a lot more consistent with people. We also have a lot of people that return and work with us again. And I think in the end, it plays a big role if you can work with the people around you well. And a company's heart is really the people that work there. So you're right. Like if I would imagine sometimes, we are working on several shows at the same time, pretty much always. And sometimes the same client, if they return to us, they will get a different team working with them. And then that's always where, unfortunately, that has to be done sometimes because of scheduling and because of other projects. But obviously, if you have a client that has already experience working with part of our team returning, and he cannot be given the same team, that's also always something that is obviously not ideal.
Yeah, agreed.
Obviously, we are trying to listen to people that come to us and listen to artists and try and work out solutions if they don't feel right at home with us. But at the end of the day, I feel that we have a pretty good rate of people that we can actually come together and work with, and everything works out for everybody. But at the same time, sometimes you will find out that some people are not really compatible. And it's not, I don't see that really as something that is bad or good. It's more like something natural. Some people will not get along with other people. And
especially when you got creatives, I think it's like a different beast of nature than most other types of people. Like a lot of artists are always a bit eccentric.
Yeah, exactly. And if that happens, obviously it can't be helped sometimes. And as I said, most of the time, I think I just remember like 2 or 3 people for my 13 years of work. But sometimes it's so sad if you see that doesn't work out. And in the end, obviously, if you notice it early enough, it's not really bad. But if it's noticed too late, that's usually bad for all sides. And that's kind of really psychologically difficult because you don't want anything bad to happen to anybody there, right? But sometimes people are just not compatible. So there
Agreed.
are those things happening as well. But on the upside, as I said, like pretty much all the people that are coming to us, I am very happy about, and we managed to work together on a couple of projects. And even if they leave, they come back. And,
Hmm.
that is part of why I stayed with Scanline for all this time.
Hmm. No, I think that's great, because again, like you're right, like to stay at one studio for such a long time, it's kind of a testament of what they're doing right, because obviously at some studios, you can be there a few weeks and jump off just because it's just so hectic, so crazy or disorganized, and yeah, like I think that the longer staying people, it kind of shows like, okay, like there's something about that studio that makes them unique to a lot of other ones.
Yeah, I really hope that. Unfortunately, though, since I don't get a lot of glimpse into other companies. That's something I have to freely admit, because I'm so long part of Scanline that I do get glimpses only through other people. I do get a lot of information. I mean, we do have a lot of people coming from different places, from pretty much all places, especially with the London area. There's a lot of exchange happening, I think.
Mm.
And also Canada, and we get people that have been to Australia and New Zealand, obviously. So I do get occasional glimpses from those workplaces, and occasionally, sometimes I get a more in-depth glimpse. And I have to say, overall, I'm kind of happy to hear that most of the time everybody is still cooking with water. So that's also something that you need to realize every now and then, that although sometimes it's really hard work and you're kind of trying to push the boundaries, maxing out the technology, maxing out the people, and in the end you sometimes are left wondering like, oh, maybe there's this other place where everything is great and everything works so smooth. And then you hear some stories about other places and you're like, oh, well, they must be fighting with the same things that we're fighting with. So
That's right. It's all polygons and pixels at the end of the day.
yeah, so that's pretty good. We're in the same ballpark.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Like, I'd love to talk some of the projects you've done, things like that. Just again, because you've got such a vast amount of experience. I'm just curious, like for you, what have been some of your favorite projects to work on?
Yeah, so obviously there are some big names, but I mean, we didn't get to work on as much of Rogue One as we would have liked to, I think. But it was a really great experience. So that was stick in my memory, not just because of the name, but because that project went so smoothly. We had some of the most experienced people we had on this project. So I have to say that was an amazing team effort there. And that was one of the most smooth projects that I've ever worked on. So that was a really great experience. And the name obviously fulfilled part of a dream of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Until Jurassic Park and Star Wars do a merge together and do a
crossover.
Yeah, crossover.
Then it was an amazing experience to work on 2012 back then. Mm-hmm. Maybe I need to mention like the very first, like the turning point of what I thought was a really great experience is working on 300. Mm-hmm. Because that was like Scanline managed to get more and more feature film work, and that was
definitely a big turning point for you guys, wasn't it?
And that was awesome to finally be able to work on this kind of movie. And it's also, I really took time and dived into the comics and had a look at every existing piece of artwork I could find, and it was really a pretty sweet project.
I love that film so much.
It was intense, but I mean, we invented some tools of our own to manage all of that, and it was pretty cool.
I think all around the board, like 300, like I know a friend of mine who got hospitalized from that film. He was doing the big slow-mo shot, like the big slow-mo shot. Yeah, he was the compositor for it.
That was called, it had a special name. Something crazy horse shot. I don't know, but Yeah, I know what you mean. The
Yeah,
one where Leonidas goes into slow motion and
that's
then
right, and forever goes in slow motion.
yeah.
But yeah, the compositor on that shot, like he literally ended up in hospital, and they're pretty much like, okay, so when can you come back from hospital to finish the shot? You know what I mean? So it's,
Mm.
but I mean, I think that show was also kind of like a huge turning point for CG in a lot of ways. Because I mean, what was the Jude Law like terrible all green screen movie that was out before that? Like there weren't that many movies that could prove that you could pretty much have all digital sets.
All before green screen. Yeah, that was taking it to a new level back then.
And it definitely was a stylized look, but it's still something that kind of showed like, wow, like you can definitely push this. So yeah, it's big.
Yeah, I think I can go just chronologically a little bit.
Sure.
So one of the most intense projects, I have to say, was Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. And that was like, I think I've never worked as much on a project before in my life. And I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I probably lost a few years of my life on that project. It was so intense.
We all have one of those.
But yeah, that was really amazing as well, on the other hand, because when I first saw the previs, we did this river god sequence where we created a river with a river god personality out of a fluid simulation. And at a time where there were no 64-bit computers, and that was really intense. But when we had a look at the previs, I literally felt shivers going down my spine, like, okay, that was one of those points where I thought, well, I would like to run away, and at the same time, I would like to jump on it and try it. So that was pretty amazing. And 2012, I think you know that movie as well.
Yeah, I had a very interesting experience on it. Definitely not as positive as your experiences, but
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was a big project because for me that was the first time I was working on a Roland Emmerich movie, and we had the opportunity to flood the Himalayas. And
yeah, that was beautiful.
That was pretty cool. I mean, that I just remember from that project I worked on a shot where this giant tidal wave filled up Himalayan valley, and there was this airport in that valley, or a lot of airplanes in the valley, and the shot was long, but it wasn't long enough, and the wave was really massive. And so we started out with the previs, and the wave rushed down the valley, and then we would get the feedback, but it looks better at 18 frames per second. Okay. Well, we have a lot of simulations. We can't simply retime it. We have to redo it all. Okay. Then next time, it looks good, but it would look better at 18 frames per second. And that became like the running gag on that show, that everything, because we had iterations until finally it got to a reasonable speed visually. Because the scaling is usually, also by now the audience is used to something, or is used to seeing something that might not be real, but since everybody is used to seeing it like that, kind of works. And there's something that you need to learn when you deal with these movies, that it's not necessarily about being accurate, because at the end of the day, the wave might be traveling at Mach speed through the valley, but visually it can still work.
Yeah, and everything, because I think that the big thing to look at with Hollywood is that Hollywood isn't real. Like, Hollywood is hyper real. And actually one of the CG supervisors on 2012 at Pixelmondo LA, Jason Crosby, I worked with him plenty of times over the years, but I think it was like 2003, I think, was the first time I worked with him, and they just finished up trying to think of the movie where everyone gets killed after through flashbacks, and trying to think of the damn movie. Anyway, Final Destination. So they did Final Destination 2. And so that was the big log sequence. And I thought it was really interesting.
Fun sequences.
I like the outtakes they did where they cut it to some weird music video and comped them sitting on all the logs as they went by, the whole team. But I thought that Jason had a really good point, which has kind of stuck with me over my entire career, which was that initially he showed simulations to the director that was physically accurate of the logs, falling off of the truck, and the logs just fall on the ground and they go thud, and they don't do anything. And the director's like, that's really boring. And he's like, okay, great. So we're in agreement that for us to move forward and make it more interesting, we're not going for physically accurate. Because I thought that was such a brilliant moment there, that so many times later is where you get caught in that endless loop that you're talking about, like 18 frames, and and having these discussions where you're trying to fight with what looks real and what what looks interesting. And at the end of the day, like, if you can come back to that original conversation and say, we're not trying for real, you remember real, it was boring, we're doing interesting, then everyone goes, oh yeah, you're right. And then you can move forward with it. And I think it's so critical to kind of have that same mindset when you're doing your shots, because Hollywood is not trying to make real. Like, cars do not fall 3 feet and then blow up,
Exactly, yeah. But at the same time, it's funny how over the years I realized that you need this common ground. So most of the time, it makes sense to show a first version that is based on reality as closely as possible, and then move ahead with feedback that where the client and you agree that you're going to take it away from reality now. Because when you start with something unreal first, you will go through a couple of iterations of forth and back between the client and yourself. And then the dreaded question will come, oh, how would this look in reality? Let's try that. And then you have already done a couple of iterations, and maybe you did an initial version that you thought, well, this looks realistic, but it isn't interesting. And then later on, the client makes you go back and show it to him that this doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that happens, and that is something where I agree most of the time you don't end up with a completely realistic result. But at the same time, it's like this common ground that you need to agree, that you both need to agree that you're leaving it now.
Yeah, definitely.
We also had the opportunity to work on Pirates of the Caribbean. What's its English name again?
Stranger Tides.
Stranger Tides. And there was one little thing that I remember, that we were working on an effect that required us to do a droplet running against gravity upside a leaf. And initially we tried all kinds of methods, but in the end it was more of a solution of taking a step back and taking a more traditional approach of actually animating a droplet. And we did use some of our simulation techniques to make that work better in rendering on the screen. But in the end, that was also a bit of a humbling experience, that you would see, well, okay, you have all this powerful software, but sometimes in the end, you just have to go in there with your hands and do something. Because something as granular as a droplet, there is no real solution for that around, for example.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, you still got to get your hands dirty and do some manual work. You can't expect the computer to do it all. And yeah, I've had those projects too, where someone's made a call somewhere along the way that something's going to be completely simulated, and in the end, it's like, well, we want to still have that control. And if you want to direct, something to do something at the right times and everything else, you're going to need to, have at least some kind of artist control in there, as well as all the other layers on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as the client says, well, this is going to be a hero object, you need to have absolute control over it. And if you're doing a simulation, you know that you're giving away some of the control.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing something that would later on serve as a background noise or enhance the environment, that is usually not a problem. But if it's something that is the hero of a shot, that will need to be precisely controlled. Yeah. Okay. We also, one of the fondest projects I was working on was Looper. I really enjoyed that movie, I have to say. I don't know, it was also a little bit of a break because we got to do a lot of particle work on that show.
What did you guys do? I worked on that as well. Obviously different studio, which it's kind of cool that I'm noticing a lot of commonalities. But what stuff did you guys do?
There is a sequence where, if you know the movie, there is this small kid who's got psychic powers.
He's a pretty terrifying kid.
Yeah, but it works well in the movie.
Yeah.
And there's this crop field, where there is a showdown in the end, and he's unleashing his psychic powers. And we had the opportunity to do all this magically rising debris and then shockwave and stuff like that. And it would build up slowly and would move in a certain direction. And that was an ideal place to do particle work. And that was at the same time a nice break from what we usually do, which is like quite long simulations and heavy
the whole world
work
coming to an end.
Yeah, and in this project, it kind of worked so well with the client, and the shots were quite beautiful. And coming from these heavy FX simulations and going into TP and going with simulations that wouldn't really need to collide with anything, but you could direct and you could take out individual objects from it and stuff like that. That felt really smooth after working with heavy simulations for so long.
That's cool.
It's also even more a bonus that I liked that a lot.
Yeah, I actually just watched it again the other day. Yeah, like it's such an underrated film. That's cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah. We also had that was also a bit of a tough time because two of those projects were really a lot of work. White House Down and Snowpiercer.
Mm-hmm.
And White House Down was our projects usually alternate between we get like a handful of shots that are really heavy, or we get like a lot of shots plus a few heavy ones. And Snowpiercer was from the Korean director, Mr. Bong, I think is his name. And that was an interesting experience. And that gave us an opportunity to do a lot of snow effects, which was also something that we did before in a way, but not at this level. And we had to do icy landscapes, we had to do avalanches, and we had to do destruction. And so it all came together in that one. And that was just so much work together with White House Down that really bogged us down a lot. And that was really difficult to go through. But Snowpiercer, a lot of the tech and the pictures that we produced, they are still holding up so well that I'm really fond of it. Also, the team was really awesome on this one. We tried a new approaches on this one as well, where we used FEM simulation for some of the destruction work.
Oh, cool. And how did that work out?
That was really, let's say it was difficult, but the result, although I think the artist himself doesn't think of it as that successful, I thought it was really nice looking. Again, I mean, since it's a simulation, FEM, you will give away some control over the kind of destruction. But FEM can do some things that nothing else can do. If you want to rip something apart and it hasn't been pre-fractured, or if it needs this organic feel of being ripped apart, there aren't that many solutions around. I mean, usually you do some cloth simulations or you just fake it. But if you can use FEM simulation, usually you won't do it because it takes too long to simulate.
Right.
And it's really rare that we use it. Mm-hmm. But still, that was one of the technical things that were quite nice. We managed to work out a few new developments with Flowline where that we built into the avalanche and stuff like that. And that was really awesome.
That's great. That's really cool. And I guess, like, what would you consider out of the more recent projects, like one of the, some of the really big ones that you've had a lot of growth on?
So I think last year we just completed Meg, and that is a new landmark for us, especially because in that one, the Munich offices and the Vancouver offices worked as closely together as never before.
Great.
And there was so much simulations involved and so much heavy FX work and coordination. That was just mind-boggling on another level. So that was massive without giving away too much about it. Because, I mean, that movie isn't out yet, but it's you can see on our website that it's wrapped, and we will probably be able to see it sometime soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I'll definitely have to check back in and see what what you guys were doing so I can keep an eye out for it.
Luckily, before that, a year before that, we did another shark movie, The Shallows, which isn't really a big production, but it had a lot of, it had this character in it, animated shark character, and it had all of this fluid interaction. It's always difficult because you have hero characters that are precisely directed, and you need the simulations to kind of follow that art direction. And that's really difficult most of the time because the animator needs to be aware that the shark is moving in water and anticipating how the shark can actually still move in the water. Otherwise, you would get
a magic shark.
Yeah, you would get effects where the fin would drag through the water and create holes through its movements. And that's something where I have to say kudos to the animators because that is really difficult. But they prepared us very slightly for the Meg. Yeah, and
I love the work on that. Like it's definitely one of those films that afterwards I have to take a peek at the credits and see who did it. So yeah, really great work on that film.
Yeah, I mean, Shallows, there were also a lot of vendors, and the time period was pretty short for the usual practice. But luckily, the client also worked closely together with us to try and find solutions to work in this tight schedule. So that was also a good experience in that way.
Cool. That's great. And yeah, I mean, again, I'd love to, I know how late it is over there, so I don't want to keep you up too much longer. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely go on for longer because I'd love to kind of really break into a lot of the different films you've done.
Yeah, to reminisce.
That's right. But no, I mean, in general,
I really sound old now, don't I?
Not at all. I'm just picturing you with a big long beard going down to the ground. No, I honestly, this is great because again, these are all such iconic films, and again, Scanline is definitely a studio that doesn't do the small stuff. It's always usually the trailer work that you guys have to,
Well, I have to object a little bit. We are offering the whole gamut of post-production. It's just once you're in that particular drawer, you tend to get certain work more often than other work. That's also something to remember for anybody who wants to go into the industry, that if you're good at one thing and you demonstrate it, expect to do it more often.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that episode. And I want to thank Ivo for taking the time out to chat. This is really fun. This is the second half of the episode. So if you want to check out the first episode with Ivo, go to allanmckay.com/136 for episode 136. Otherwise, you can get the show notes for this episode, which will also link to it, which is allanmckay.com/143. And there'll also be a link to the free training available at the moment as well. So next episode 144, I'm going to be speaking with one of the founders of Soho VFX in Toronto, Canada. I'll be speaking with Burj Benayan, who is one of the founders of Soho, and we get into a lot of really cool stuff. Burj has worked on everything from Logan, Poltergeist, Into the Woods. I'm just totally looking at his IMDb right now. There's lots of really cool movies. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, RoboCop, Final Destination 5, X-Men, Incredible Hulk, a lot of the X-Men movies, a lot of really cool stuff. And what I love about this episode is that Burj gets really technical. We talk about a lot of pipeline stuff. We talk about a lot of studios, their success and failures and why. We get into just a lot, especially advice for people applying for jobs and wanting to work at studios similar to his. So there's just a lot of really great stuff. And I love talking with owners of studios where they've had that experience working with big teams, growing a company, seeing the industry change over time. So there's so much great stuff in there. That episode will be coming up next. So until then, like I said, check out the show notes for this episode, allanmckay.com/143. And if you can take a moment to share this episode around, I would be forever grateful. That is it for now. I'll be back next week with Burj Benayan. Until then, rock on.